Good morning, friends. That Gaming Author here, and welcome to Saturday, May 14th, I believe it is. It is 7:13 in the morning, so I woke up pretty early today. So, pretty awesome if you ask me. It's been a good morning so far, a productive morning. I woke up at like 6, took a shower, and then felt oddly inspired to work on a game I've been meaning to make for the past few years. Well, longer than that. I keep forgetting the past few years have been quarantine, and it's not all just one giant year. It's a game I've been planning on making. There's quite a bit of music on my YouTube channel that was for this game specifically, and I just started working on some of the environmental maps. Uh, it all takes place in a single city. It's very Persona based, or Persona inspired, I guess. So, like a lot of the dungeons take place in like an alternate universe kind of a thing. So, the whole story just kind of takes place in this one city, which I like. It kind of allows it to be consolidated, and that's kind of the story I want to write. It's simpler than the one I've been working on in some ways, and more complicated in others. And I'm not sure how much sense that makes, but I'm enjoying the process either way. It's a fun game to make. The characters are great. And the characters also hold a soft spot in my heart too, since a lot of them are inspired by really good friends I've had in the past. So whenever I think of those characters, it's like, oh, these are really cool people I used to know. Or at least they're similar depictions of people I used to know. So yeah, that's cool. Well, I wouldn't say depictions. They're more like they're just inspired by them because I used to know some really cool people. I still know some really cool people, but a lot of the cool people I know I haven't really been in contact with, so that's why I really say that. The cats are being weird as always. They've been all over me since I woke up. I think they're waiting for food, but their breakfast time's not in another hour, so it's like, I can't feed you guys yet. I will soon though, don't worry. Just got another 45 minutes to go. But anyway, I'm probably going to get yesterday's vlogs put into Vegas and rendered, which I've been reluctant to do because that means I won't be able to work on the game for like an hour and a half or so, but I feel like I woke up early enough that once the video's done, I should have some time before before work. I'm also going to be able to pick Kayla up today since she's off an hour before I work, so we actually have time to walk home together, which is always nice. But yeah, with that being said, I think I'm going to get going with the rest of today. I feel like I always begin these with a sigh. Oh, look at Jumper. I think he followed me into the room. Hi, buddy. Oh, look at that big ol' yawn. Such a good boy. Did you follow me from the office? Did you follow me from the study? Jumper's such a sweet boy. It's almost time to pick Ayla up, which also means it's almost time to work. But I don't really mind. I can deal with the workday. Today is Friday number 2, technically, because I have tomorrow off, and then it's my birthday in a couple days. I don't really have any birthday plans, more or less, because, whoops, sorry, Jumper. I swear, he walks everywhere I go, or he walks right where I'm about to step, basically. But, yeah, I don't really have any birthday plans for Monday because I work that day, but we might just be celebrating it a day early. I think we're just gonna go out to lunch with my mom, like Kayla and I, maybe, depending on timing and everything. We do still have some housing things to do that day, though, so hopefully we can go out after all that's taken care of. And that's the goal, at least. And then I eventually want to get back into doing more creative stuff. I woke up early enough to, work on my game, like I mentioned earlier. I was able to make a couple maps, which is a lot more progress than I've made in a while. I actually made pretty detailed maps. I've decided to kind of scale down my scope a little bit because I've always had this obsession with making really large maps, and I think that's what makes me lose my motivation to work on them. So I've scaled back and I'm making smaller maps to add more detail and make them feel a little more alive. And I'll just, once I start adding NPCs to the game, it'll probably feel even more alive. And I'm hoping to just make the city feel connected. It's all connected by roads, and you can only go from one map to another via the sidewalks. And you can technically walk on the roads, but I think I'm going to make it to where you can encounter enemies on the road, so that way, first of all, there's an incentive to walk where it's safe, and secondly, it's, I guess, a good way to sort of grind, because, like I said, the game's very Persona-inspired, so what happens is that you go dungeon crawling at certain points in the game, and you don't, like, unlike Persona, you don't have, like, a time limit, but the game doesn't really let you explore the dungeons at your leisure. You have to explore them within, like, once you reach a certain point in the dungeon, the game kind of kicks you out, and then you have to come back a little later in the story. It's kind of one of those deals, so it's linear, but at the same time, I'm going to give players options to explore and find, like, optional scenes and things like that. It's for how simple the game's premise is, there's a lot in it that can make the game a little complex and make it to where, you know, one player may have one experience, another player may have another. You know, it's very choice heavy, and I want to emphasize that with the environment, giving players the choice to explore in certain places and not put too many limits on the players. So I'll make it very clear where you have to go to progress the story, so that way players can find these optional scenes and then, you know, understand that if they go in there, they're not going to miss out on something else. So they can explore to their heart's content, basically. That's the idea behind it, and I want to emphasize that. With a game this simple, you can still get the option to explore. I always like that in games where you can play as much or as little as you want, basically, and while the story itself is kind of on rails, depending on certain choices you make, the game itself is still going to be pretty open. But yeah, that's the point of scaling down the maps. I want them to be more detailed, more alive, and feel less overwhelming to explore. Also, it makes it more difficult to get lost, so you don't end up wandering, you know, where you're supposed to go or things like that. I want to make it easy for players to know where they're supposed to go and know that they don't have to go there immediately. There's no rush to getting to a certain objective. Yeah, that's my philosophy on game design. But it looks like it's about time for me to head out and pick Kayla up, so I'm probably going to take a few sips of coffee, get some music going, and head out. So with that, I will check in later. I don't know when. It might be when we read chapter 2 of my book, but again, we'll have to see. First break of the day. Things are going well, and my seat was immediately hijacked by this little boy. Look at that sneaker. How do you feel about stealing my spot there, Jumper? It's going pretty well. I'm getting plenty of progress done in writing. I finally finished chapter 5, so now we are on to chapter 6. Because that's how chapters work. Yeah, we can do basic math over here in the author corner, whatever you want to call this. But yeah, getting plenty of writing done. I have been drinking coffee today because I figured I have one more, so I'm like, you know what, why not? I'll probably make tea later tonight though, because I actually find it pretty good. So yeah, I definitely won't be quitting coffee, but I think I'll be drinking a lot of tea as well, just to kind of keep my throat in decent shape. Yeah, and that's pretty much it for now. Camera was a little weird there. It's past midnight, so it's technically not today anymore, but I'm counting it as today. Excuse me. Because it was a long night, a good night though. It was busy in a good way. And I lost track of time and wanted to make sure we did tonight's nightly reading. I hope you'll excuse me if my throat's a little off. I haven't actually had water in a few hours, to be completely honest, so my voice is a little scratchy, but I should do a sufficient enough job for this. Alright. Chapter 2. The Chamber. Garen followed behind Peter and Anne as they made their way back down the bell tower toward the stairs, made their way back down the bell tower stairs. The sound of the bell's toll echoed across the walls. Garen's ears were ringing at the sound. "Why are they still going at it?" Garen asked, his voice loud as he tried not to be drowned out by the bell. "The bishop said he'd come upstairs once he completed his business with the Crownsguard members in the village," Anne said. "In the meantime, the children of the church are assigned the task of ringing this bell." "The younger kids love it," Peter said with a chuckle. "Can't say I blame 'em. A little chaos once in a while is good. Keeps the old people angry at the young, so they stay off our backs." Toll after toll, the reverberating sound stuck with Garen even after he and his friends arrived at the bottom of the tower. Peter and Anne led him towards the left of the tower. Before them was the northernmost wall of the church foyer. To the right was a corridor leading further into the church, and to their left was a particularly narrow hallway. "Many of the churches in the world have secrets," Peter said. "They're built like fortresses and were used in times of war to keep people safe when villages were raided by enemy soldiers." "What are you getting at?" Garen asked. "There's a secret area over in this corridor," Anne said. "This is where the princess is." As if out of reflex, Peter grabbed a lit torch hanging on the wall to the left of the hallway and held it into the darkness. "I just need to remember where it is," he said. "Where what is?" Garen asked. Peter walked further into the hallway until he reached a dead end. Garen and Anne followed. The air felt colder in the narrow hallway, save for the heat coming from Peter's torch. Peter held the torch behind himself, and Anne grabbed the wall, while Peter felt around the stone brick wall. "The switch behind the wall," he said. He grabbed a loose brick from the wall and pulled it out slightly, the rough sound of stone rubbing against stone filling the silence of the cold hallway. Dust gathered at everyone's feet as the wall lifted itself from the floor, as a clicking sound was heard, almost like the sound of a latch unlocking. Peter began to push on the far right side of the wall, and to Garen's surprise, the entire wall swung open. Behind the open wall was another corridor. This one, however, was constructed with smooth black marble bricks. There were stairs leading downward made of polished wood, and the long corridor was well illuminated with dimly lit lamps. "You're telling me the princess is down here?" Garen asked, his voice echoing in the chamber. "This place is like a dungeon." "It's a safe haven until we can find a way to bring her back to Livia unseen," Anne said. "No one in the village would think to find something like this in a church of all places." "No one here would even try to," Peter said. "Most people are too worried about defiling the house of God, so they wouldn't think to dislocate a brick." Peter led the charge down the wooden stairs, with Anne and Garen following. Garen wrapped his arms around himself, rubbing his hands against his forearms. "It's so cold down here," he said, able to see his breath. "Are you guys sure this isn't a dungeon?" "I felt the same way when I first saw this," Anne said. "But I assure you, this place is perfectly safe." Garen let out a single chuckle and looked around at their surroundings. "Safe," he scoffed. "Sure." The staircase they descended led directly to a modest wooden door rounded at the top with a polished glass knob. Peter approached the door and wrapped his fingers around the knob. He pressed his index finger to his pursed lips and faced Garen and Anne as he slowly turned the doorknob and pushed the wooden door inward. A whiff of lavender rushed out of the door the moment it opened. Garen and Anne stood up taller to look over Peter's shoulder. A flickering light emerged from the door. As it opened, the group saw the room inside. It was small, but well decorated. Despite the lack of windows or lights, the room was well illuminated by various candles. The entire room was filled with lavender flowers. In the center was a queen-sized bed with maroon velvet sheets, and in the bed lay the princess herself, Lenora Morenthia. Her long black hair was tossed about and frayed at the ends. Her eyes were shut tight. The light of the candles danced across her face, casting moving shadows on the shape of the flames. The door's hinges squealed quietly as Peter closed the door. He turned the knob while closing it. Once it was finished, he looked at Peter and Anne with a smile. "See," he said, "the princess herself, Lenora Morenthia." Garen stood still for a few moments, still staring at the door before them with his lips cracked open. His heartbeat intensified. The image of Lenora's face flashed in his brain, and for a single moment, his entire body seized up. Pain flew through his muscles, starting from his head and crawling all the way down his back. A groan escaped the back of his throat As he grabbed his forehead and fell to his knees, Peter knelt down beside him with a hand on his back. "Dude," he said, his hand firm around Garen's shoulder. "Dude, are you okay?" Garen closed his eyes, holding them shut until he saw the afterimage of the world around him flashing like lights in the darkness behind his eyelids. He shivered as the image of Princess Lenora popped into his mind. In the image, she was standing beside him, gazing at a starry sky. Though the image lasted for only a second, it felt like an eternity. Garen felt Lenora's presence, the cold of the nighttime air. In an instant, the image was gone. The pain followed suit. Air filled Garen's lungs as he took a deep breath inward. "I'm fine," he said as the air left through his lips. He stood back up and looked at his friends. "I'm okay." "You don't look okay." Anne grimaced. She crossed her arms and put a hand on Garen's forehead. An inquisitive came from Anne before she pulled her hand away and nodded. "Like hell you're okay, Garen. You're burning up." "I'm fine," Garen said. "I swear." He looked at Anne, who was still grimacing. His gaze moved towards Peter, whose eyes were soft and lips curled into a neutral frown. "It was just some weird—" Garen hesitated. After a moment, he grabbed his forehead and shook his head. "I don't know what it was, but seeing the princess, it—" He closed his eyes and shook his head. "Forget it. I don't even know what just happened." After a moment, he looked back up at Peter. "So, what's the plan? Are we under arrest for kidnapping royalty now? Maybe the guillotine for all parties involved?" "The bishop sent a letter to the king and queen," Peter said. "He requested that they send a carriage to our village so we could bring her back to Livia safely. So, we're just waiting for their response." "The plans aren't finalized yet," Anne said. "Once daybreak hits, Lucius and the bishop plan on holding a meeting with the three of us." "Why the three of us?" Garen asked. Peter started to head back up the stairs behind them as he answered. "They're putting us on the job." "They are?" Garen smirked and crossed his arms while they headed back to the main temple area. "Feels like it's been forever since they had a job lined up for us." "Keep in mind that this escort job is probably the most important job we've ever been hired to do. Making sure Princess Lenora returns home safely is no small task. Our lives might even be at stake." "You say that like it's going to scare me." Garen grinned as he spoke. "Lucius and the bishop know exactly what we've been through. We could handle an escort job." But even with Garen's confidence, Peter had a concerned expression. "Garen, you're 12 years old." Peter kept his gaze away from Garen and Anne. "And Anne, you're just 13. You two shouldn't have to do any of this." "So sayeth the reckless one of us of the group," Anne said. "None of us have to do anything, but we do it voluntarily." "And you should know by now that we can handle ourselves," Garen said. "Our age has nothing to do with it. We've all been stuck together for a while. You know what Anne and I are capable of." Peter avoided eye contact, silent for but a moment before he scoffed. "Stubborn as ever," he said with a smile. "I suppose you're right. You're both tough as nails." "We're smart as well," Anne added, running to catch up with Peter as they left the black marble corridor. "You've got nothing to worry about." "If anything, you're the one to worry about," Garen said to Peter with a grin. "You're tough too, but with your drinking habits, I think the alcohol will kill you sooner than any enemy." "Hey, that was just once," Peter snapped. "I do not have a drinking problem." Anne held her hands behind her back and looked at Peter with her head tilted sideways, her hair falling below her shoulders. "The first step is admitting you have a problem," she said. "There's no need to deny it." "Shut up," Peter said, shoving Anne away. Garen and Anne simply laughed behind him. As the three of them returned to the foyer of the church, Garen saw that the crowd out front had dispersed. But in their place were members of the Orlivian Crownsguard, men and women clad in iron armor with royal blue shawls. A golden emblem depicting a shield with a lion and a sword was emblazoned on each shawl, and each member held their helms at their side. In front of them, Lucius stood beside a shorter, elderly man clad in the cloth of the Aluraean Church. The Crownsguard members lifted their hands to their foreheads, saluting the elderly man, and left the church. "I assume we can tell the children to stop now?" Peter asked, leading the group toward the two men in front of them. Lucius and the elderly man, who wore a kind expression on his aged face, turned around. The elderly man, Bishop Mark Alaharde, looked at the three with his hands clasped over the rounded top of a staff made of tanned driftwood. "We can indeed," he said, his voice rough. "Considering that all three of you are here, I assume you two showed Garen where the princess is staying?" "We have, sir," Anne said, with a polite bow. "And we're ready to begin the meeting any time now." The bishop nodded and bowed in response. "In that case, we will meet in the chapel," he said. "But first, we need to let the children know to stop ringing the bell before they drive the whole village insane. Lucius, could you accompany these three to the bell tower while I make preparations for our meeting?" "Of course," Lucius said. He looked at the three children before him and smiled. "Well, shall we?" And that, my friends, is Chapter 2 of Black Crystal Book 1, The Origin. I hope you liked it. I feel like that was definitely longer than the last two chapters, but, whatever. These chapters can vary from length, or they can vary in length a lot, and wait till we get to Book 2. The chapters in that get pretty lengthy, so I'm going to need to prepare my voice for that. In any case, I think we can call this a day. I will see you guys tomorrow, and I hope you had a day, and I'll see you tomorrow.